Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to another Climbing the Rating Ladder video. We're playing black here against Lorenz Yaga, rated 2013. Let's get into it. Okay, I feel like every time I start a YouTube video these days, I gotta say it's been a while, because it really has. I swear I'll make it up to you guys in 2025. Okay, so d4, this is the Blackmar Demar Gambit. I'm gonna take the pawn. You occasionally face this against the Scandinavian, but it's not that common, certainly in serious games. Now, against knight c3, I actually really like this move e5. This is what I'm going to recommend in my upcoming Scandinavian course. It's a counterattacking move. Theoretically stronger is to play bishop f5 or knight f6 and guard the pawn on e4. But I like the momentum-changing aspects of a move like this. So striking at white center. Do they want to take the pawn but allow a queen trade and have to figure out which way to recapture? That really dampens any attacking chances they were hoping to drum up. And they do play that way. But yeah, I'm pretty happy here. We both have pawns that are a little overextended. I think I want to play knight c6 here. Go after this pawn on e5. And if we have a pure exchange of the pawns, I got to believe I'm at least equal because white's king is on d1. White cannot castle to safety, whereas I will have the option of castling to safety soon, potentially with check. And even though queens are off the board, that could become relevant because white's king is potentially exposed here down the d file. So white guards the pawn on f4. I'm out of my book knowledge at this point. I don't remember what I recommend here or if I even analyzed this far in my course. Probably did because I'm pretty thorough in there. I'm just going to play bishop f5. So both of us developing our bishops, guarding the pawns, getting ready to castle with check. And I would love to pick this pawn off on e5 sometime. So maybe knight e7 to g6 is a potential maneuver. White could consider the same thing. Knight e2 to g3. Just checking my recording because I'm always paranoid, especially if I haven't been recording for a while, that this is just going to be a non-video and I hadn't started it and I'm just talking to myself for 30 minutes. Okay, f3. So white challenges the pawn. I don't see a reason not to play castles queenside with check. White's probably going to scooch their king to c1, but I think it just makes sense. Let's do it. This is a 10-minute game with no increment. So any easy decisions I can make. Okay, and white doesn't play the move that I expected. So I think this is a blunder because I can take on f3 and then this pawn on c2 is vulnerable. And not only that, I can think about playing knight b4 to attack c2 instead of bishop takes c2. So the old adage, if you see a good move in chess, look for better, right? I could pick off the pawn, but why not try to take it with the knight? That's hard to parry. Let's do it, because I'd love to land a fork on the king and the rook. Now, I think at minimum, I'm probably going to win a pawn with check, and white may be scrambling a bit with their king if they end up having to move it. Like, let's say rook c1, knight takes c2 check. If king f2, maybe bishop c5 comes with check. I could see myself gaining further momentum that way. Okay, yeah, so even though I haven't been posting, I have been well. The Scandinavian course has occupied so much of my time the last year and a half, but I'm pretty much done with it now. I'm just in the editing phase and also figuring out where and when I'm going to release it. So stay tuned for some announcements related to that. In the meantime, you can check out the Scandinavian course waiting list. It's in the description if you just want to be notified when that course goes live. So ambitious move by white, or maybe a desperate move, probably more desperation because they're allowing me to take with check and get that fork, but they're hoping to make it up on the back end here by taking on f7. But I think we start with this move. Let's see where white puts their king, because again, this gives me more options. If I want to play bishop c5 check first, which I think I may want to do because I'm envisioning, let's say I play bishop c5 check and king f3 is played. I can take the rook on a1, knight takes f7, and then play something like knight e7 or knight h6. and my rooks will be connected at that point, I think I'll probably end up being ahead a piece. So let's play the check to start. Expecting either king f3 or maybe king g3, perhaps more likely. If white wants to try to keep their king a little more safe. Yeah, and I like going for the rook because if I pause to defend this pawn, white gets a chance to move their rook to safety. So I'm just thinking on white's time at this moment. They're not going to play king e2. Okay, right as I said that. That move looks so ugly, blocks the bishop. I wonder why they didn't like these moves. So again, I can think about taking the rook, certainly. That's my default move here. But remember, if you see a good move, look for better. So it also occurred to me, can I play for checkmate? Bishop d3. White can play king f3 at that point. I don't really see what I've gained. Bishop g4 is almost checkmate, but white has the backwards knight move. Knight f3. But then I can take the rook and I no longer have to worry about knight takes f7, right? Yeah, so bishop g4 I think is going to be a pretty clean winner here. I'm just highlighting all the squares that the white king is going to be unable to go to. So let's do it. Force knight f3 and then take that rook. No knight takes f7 in the air. Yeah, and I forgot to point this out, but this is called the Lemberger defense. This move that I played on move 3, e5. So Lemberger defense. My opponent wants to chat. They said GG. The preemptory GG. Yeah, I can understand. Let's just take the rook. Maybe they'll play it out, though. Okay, hits the bishop. Yeah, let's just move this back. I don't have to be in a hurry to take this knight on f3 if I plan to take it at all. If this other knight circles around to g5, attacks f7, I can always play knight h6. Develop and defend the pawn. And white's coordination is so poor here. Bishop stuck. You really hate this construction where the king's on e2 and it blocks the bishop. Hardly anything white can do. I think I'm going to play bishop f5 here. So if knight g5, bishop d3 is a killer with those bishops side by side. King e1, knight c2. Try to force white into the line of fire. Yeah, give the check. White can struggle on here a little bit. King e1, knight c2, king d2, bishop takes f1. But I have bishop takes f1, bishop takes g2. And that's just way too much material already. So, okay. Thanks to my opponent for the game. Yeah, not white's best effort. Absolutely. Even though there is a big rating gap here, and that's part of climbing the rating ladder. I always play on my normal account. I just have been doing that for years and years. So we're going to see rating mismatches. But this player being 2000, I'm sure they're much better than what this game reflects. But a sloppy game by white, right? You just can't play that way out of the opening. And white made some assumptions, I think, with this f3 move, and especially king e1. Like, I think king e1 is already really flirting with danger. Let me just turn off the engine for a second. I think you got to go this direction and protect the c2 pawn to avoid issues like what happened in the game. So we'll take a brief look at the analysis here. But yeah, if you face this gambit, which you can face in a number of different ways, so it especially comes about via d4, d5. If you play queen's pawn to d5 in response to white playing queen's pawn to d4, I don't know why I'm using descriptive notation, but you know, you'll face e4 once in a blue moon. White's hoping to accelerate their development. Like, let's just say something like this, f3. White hopes to get quick development going, bishop c4. Famous traps here, like if bishop g4, white has bishop takes f7, followed by knight e5 check. They can swing back and take the bishop on g4. But even if white doesn't have that, like let's say bishop f5, something along these lines, can get dangerous for black if they're not careful here. because there's massive pressure down the f-file and also towards the pawn on f7. So that's generally what white is hoping for out of this Black-Mar-D-Mar Gambit, offering a pawn, but opening lines in the center, trying to accelerate development, especially down the E and the F files, and castling kingside, occasionally castling queenside. But yeah, I'm a big fan of these momentum breaking moves, like what I play and recommend here, which is E5. And I played this in other videos, I've mentioned it before, but I just really like the concept in chess where, especially if your opponent's a gambitier, you know, like they have their little pet specialty lines where they give a pawn or 2 pawns or maybe even more. If you have a way to short circuit all the fun that they're having while still playing something challenging that kind of gets them on their back foot a little bit all of a sudden, I just like that switch up. And I think the average player doesn't really react to that very well. Okay. And a lot of times the engines, the books are not going to say that that's best. Like, I fully admit E5 is not the technically best move here. It's bishop F5 and knight F6, developing and holding the pawn. But practically speaking, I know this move scores very well for black. And probably the best white can do is something like bishop E3 here to defend the pawn in the center. And we can look for some trades. Yeah, maybe white wins the pawn back. Maybe they castle and try to use their development somehow. But white's the one who's going to have to prove equality versus having all this tactical fun at black's expense. I believe online, actually, the most common move in response to E5 is pawn D5. So trying to bypass the black pawn on E5 and also avoid an exchange of queens. But then black gets to play F5. And this little cluster of pawns is really difficult for white to break up. For example, if they play F3, I believe the move is bishop B4 here, inviting white to play F takes E4, you know, kind of King's Gambit style, because that runs into queen H4 check. And then if G3, you can play queen takes E4 check, fork the king and the rook, because that knight on C3 is pinned. That's just carnage. So yeah, Lemberger defense, really useful practical weapon here. I have had good results with this over the years. I played it in classical as well. So white did do something that I don't normally see. Actually, the one game I played in classical, white did play this way against me. D takes E5. But then we get to trade the queens. And white has to decide, take with the king, take with the knight. You know, you hate to take with the knight because you deactivate the piece, but it may be better than losing castling rights. Nevertheless, black's going to be doing very well here along the lines of the game. But yeah, as played in the game, you know, probably white should play knight takes E4 and just play this symmetrical looking knight situation in the center and try to get their king to safety. You know, bishop F4, let's say something, I guess knight G6 loses this pawn. So I actually don't remember what the move is here. Maybe it's even a knight takes E4, bishop F5 first. You go bishop G4, I think F3 slows you down slightly. But it might be bishop F5 first. I'm going to just load the engine just to confirm. No, it says this is fine. And now it gives a few different moves. Yeah, counterattacking bishop F5, even knight F6. Yeah, actually, this knight F6 move looks familiar. That is the top engine choice. Kind of an audacious line looking for this, where black gets the attack on F2. And if takes, yeah, I do remember this from the course, actually. Even though you voluntarily wrecked your kingside structure, you prop up that knight in the center, and black's looking to develop here pretty quick, because that king often does get caught in the line of fire. Maybe bishop C5 coming, probe that pawn on F2. Yeah, white's going to have some difficulties. But that's probably the better option for white, I would think, after knight C6. If white pins the knight, we can just play bishop D7, among other moves. Break the pin, renew the threat of knight takes E5, get ready to castle. That's no problem. This line, by the way, is pretty similar to in the Scandinavian if white plays D3. And then we get a trade here, trade the queens. It looks very similar to this, where white voluntarily gives up their right to castle. In this case, though, black hasn't necessarily established a pawn in the center. So just white has a pawn in the middle. Okay, so yeah, we both brought our knights out. White doesn't take the pawn on e4. White plays bishop f4 to defend, but the engine already is liking this for black. Bishop f5. Yeah. Maybe this would have been better. Knight e2 for white. Castles and then king c1. Just trying to play knight g3 if they can. Go after the bishop. Go after the pawn on e4. Yeah, that looks, I think, a little more reasonable. Probably at minimum, I can target the pawn on e5. So say like rook e8. And then if here, yeah, bishop d7 I like in order to prevent any issues with bishop b5. So probably at minimum, I can do something like this. And again, with white's king, ever so slightly disturbing their coordination, preventing their queenside rook from easily getting into the game. Probably black's going to be slightly better here, which the engine indicates. So white plays f3, and let's see if my instinct is correct that white kind of has to play king c1 here. Yeah, there's about a 3/4 pawn difference between those two moves, more than that even. So we castle with check. And I just think to keep that pawn on c2 protected, you kind of got to do this. And probably I would have traded and played knight e7 and tried to go for knight g6. But it's a game. I mean, bishop c4, yeah, attack this pawn. Let's say here, knight d4 doesn't look like a move I would play in this position. I probably would have done this. Yeah, bishop e6 maybe to defend this pawn. And just try to exploit what I mentioned about white's king being a bit awkwardly placed. Like if white plays b3, trying to go king b2, we can throw the bishop into a3, and that's going to further mess white up. So yeah, that's probably about the best white can hope for. King e1, on the other hand, I was pretty happy to play e takes f3. Don't even think I considered bishop b4, which is right up there for the engine as well. Oh, interesting. Okay, so what is it not like about knight b4? Because this move looks so tempting. Not in the top 3 moves. Maybe that would change if we gave the engine longer to think. I mentioned this before, but the chess.com engine, you can change up your parameters and stuff if you want to try to get a stronger evaluation. But I think you can only really take this at face value sometimes. So yeah, I wouldn't doubt, though, that maybe white has some chance to stabilize after knight b4. I think I was mentioning rook c1 and then trying to bail with the king. Like bishop c5, king g3. Yeah. This is still almost -2, though, in black's favor. It also mentions rook d1. Ugh. Take and king e2. So ugly. And white's down a pawn, but okay, maybe. Maybe I gotta be a bit conscious about how my knight is getting out of here. But yeah, it looks pretty clean. Looks pretty much good for black. Let's say I even do this and then back the knight out. Like bishop c4 looks natural here. Yeah, knight d3. Yeah, I think a lot of these scenarios are just going to resolve to a position where black's up a pawn. Maybe it takes a few moves to get the king side organized, but black is too solid for white to be able to launch something. Like even against f7, I think I have too many ways I can thwart that pressure if need be. Yeah, so the damage was really done with king e1 versus king c1. Position's already not great, but that I think more or less seals it. Yeah, and then knight g5. Again, don't want to harp on my opponent too much because it's already a tough position, but I do think you got to move the rook. This is kind of a short-sighted calculation because, yes, you have the fork potential here and here, but white's really giving me a lot with this first mover advantage, taking the pawn with check, and then potentially being able to play another move with check, as I did in the game. So this bishop c5 move. If white had played king e2, does that change much? Just trying to think without the aid of the engine. I mean, I could still try to do what I did in the game, but then king f2 makes some sense because they might be able to hit the bishop on g4 eventually. Yeah, I guess I probably would think about doing this, and then maybe like bishop e6 here, because I'm happy to give this rook for the knight and then try to get my knight out. Maybe it won't get out. I don't know. But I'm also thinking if they take this one here, I can slowly develop and try to target that knight with my rook when they can't play knight f7 because the bishop guards. So seeing the engine, that does look like it's winning. Assuredly not the only thing, though. Yeah, other moves here. I mean, if I really want to play it safe, I think knight h6 would be the move to play. Just develop and guard f7. Keep the attack on the rook. Gives white a chance to do this, but something like knight d4. Black's always up a clean pawn here, and white's going to have ongoing issues with their king, too. But yeah, king f2, and then check, and then king e2 now. Pretty much just gave me bishop c5 for free. And I like this bishop g4 move because white has only one legal move here, which is the move they played, knight f3, whereupon I can take, and there's no hint of counterplay or messiness now. Easy peasy. Yeah, and I was thinking at the end, if white goes king d1, take the bishop, and then take here, winning more material. It's just way too much. Okay, so short game, one-sided game, but hopefully you picked up a couple things. This Lemberger defense or Lemberger Countergambit, that is what I'm going to recommend in my upcoming Scandi course, which again, you can get on the waiting list for that. Check the description. And more important than this move, it's just this philosophy. Like you guys who've watched my videos for a long time, you know I've often talked about when facing a gambit, taking the first pawn, but not taking the second pawn. That's sort of this philosophy, right? So I'm not saying I'm going to hold on to this pawn that I just took. I'm not super attached to that. I want to play a move that potentially puts white on their back foot. You know, if you want to play a gambit and hope that I go along with it and you get to open lines, well, that's fine if the engine thinks this is better for black, but I don't have to play that way. I can counterattack while you're potentially burning time going after this pawn. Why don't I counterattack in the center and see what you're going to do? So there's theory here too with knight takes e4 and then queen takes d4, by the way, looking for a queen trade and taking the pawn. I remember analyzing some stuff like this in the course too. Here, knight f6. Well, I can try to gain some time, but generally black's doing pretty well. True Scandinavian fashion, bringing the queen out early. So keep that in mind. You know, next time you face a gambit, okay, if you have a pet defense against a certain gambit, great. And you have good results in it, more power to you. But remember that you have optionality. You don't have to go along with what your opponent is putting out there. You know, I'll leave you with another quick parting example. So when I used to play e5 in response to e4, which was my pre-Scandinavian days, and then a little bit post-Scandinavian too, for a period until I went back to the Scandinavian. Against the King's Gambit, undoubtedly the strongest move for black is e takes f4, accepting the gambit. But this gets messy. This can get messy for a human from the black side, even if you know what you're doing. Jan Nepomniachtchi wrote an entire course on Chessable on this opening, advocating it for white. So what I always like doing is I like just playing bishop c5 here. Get the bishop in the game. White can't even take the pawn. This is one thing a lot of players don't know about the King's Gambit. White is not threatening to take the pawn on e5 because queen h4, a motif we saw that I mentioned in the analysis actually to the game. This is crushing. So I just like getting this bishop out, occupying a great diagonal, this g1, a7 diagonal. White can go knight c6, but then we can play d6. Okay, this isn't going to refute the King's Gambit by any means, but you'll win a surprising amount of games when people fall for this stuff. And it's also pretty easy to play for black. Knight c6, knight f6. Enjoy the diagonal here. If white knows what they're doing, they'll play c3, d4, but even that requires some nuance. Okay, thanks to my opponent. Appreciate this, Lorenziaga. Let me know your thoughts if you happen to watch this. And thanks again for everyone watching. Appreciate you all. Hope you're having a great start to your 2025. More videos to come this year. And check out the Scandy course waiting list. I'll plug it one more time. All right, later, guys. Let me know if you have any questions or comments.